Hello everyone and welcome back to Ruby Lessons on Codecademy. So first of all, I would like to apologize for not having any videos in the last week, but that was because I was ill and had a sore throat and you might hear me cough. I also would like to apologize for that in advance. But let's just get straight into this, into our new section. Well, we've already started a new section, but let's get into classes and objects. So let's continue with the section. Scope it out. So if you remember in the last lesson we started looking at objects and object-oriented programming in Ruby. And we discussed why it's good. It was quite a longer video if I remember correctly. So, okay, let's get into this lesson. Another important aspect of Ruby classes is scope. So the scope of a variable is the context in which it's visible to the program. So basically what scope means is who or what can use a certain variable that the class has, or an instance of the class has. So it may surprise you to learn that not all variables are accessible to all parts of a Ruby program at all times. You will see what this means in just a bit. So when dealing with classes, you can have variables that are available everywhere, called global variables, ones that are only available at certain methods, local variables, and others that are members of a certain class, class variables, and variables that are only available to particular instances of a class, instant variables. So those you probably wouldn't be able to find them outside of the class itself. You wouldn't be able to call them in a way. So the same goes for methods. Some are available everywhere, some are only available to members of a certain class, and still others are only available to particular instance objects. So, as we've seen, methods can sometimes work similar to variables in a way, so in this case they also do the same. So instructions, check out the code in the editor. See how some variables start with a $mark, @mark, or double @mark. So this helps mark them as global, instance, and class variables respectively. So the $mark is global, instance is single @, class is double @. We'll explain these in the next section. Click Save and Submit Code to see how these different variables work. So let's just look at them and find them. So we have manufacturer with a $sign in front of it. That means that it's global. And that basically means it's kind of available everywhere. You can easily find it. Then we have files with a double @. That means that it's a class variable. So it would be quite difficult for you to get access to it, if you will. You also have the username, which is a single @, and that's an instance variable. So you would probably only be able to access it through methods in the class. Let's just see what happens when we run this. So we have the first thing, this is the first thing. We make a new instance called hall of a computer. So current user Dave, let's see, puts current user, and we are looking for the user which where is it? Here we go, current user, define current user, that's the method name, and it calls @username, which is an instance, but because we called it through a method, we can access the instance variable. Then we also have manufacturer. Let's find manufacturer, that's a global variable, so we can easily find that. Manufacturer, @manufacturer, as you can see, we aren't calling a method in this case, we are just calling the variable directly. And then we find files. Files, in this case, are class variables. To get them, we do computer.displayFiles, and that has a self display files. It's another method, and it's calling it on self. Self means do it on the instance that it's called from. You will see what that means as well in just a second. So let's move on. Naming your variables. So recall that instance variables begin with an @. This isn't just a Ruby convention. It's part of the syntax, so you have to use it if you want to make an instance variable. Always start your instance variables with an @ symbol. Class variables are like instance variables, but instead of belonging to an instance of a class, they belong to the class itself. So class variables always start with two @s, like so. So they, instead of being just part of one specific class, or once of just the class, they're a part of the instance. So they are instance specific. Global variables can be declared in two ways. The first is one that's already familiar to you. You just define the variable outside of any method or class, and you get it. You get what you want. It's global. If you want to make a variable global from inside a method or a class, just start it with a $, like so. So you have maths with a $sign in front of it. So we'll go through instance and class variables in more detail in a moment. First, let's do a quick review of local and global scope. Instructions, let's take a look at the code to the right. Okay, so we have class, my variable equals hello, end. So my class has a variable called my variable that's equal to hello, and then we end it. This my variable doesn't have any scope given to it. And then when we do puts my variable, well, let's see what happens. Nothing. So what we need to do is inside the class, the variable my variable is inside a class, so it's not reachable by the puts method outside of it. It's quite understandable. You can't access everything a class has. But you can fix this. Use either of the two global variable tricks mentioned above. So we can't just simply put a $sign in front of it. Oh, okay, or maybe not. I just put the $sign in the wrong place. You need the $sign when you are calling my variable. So here. You can put it here and here. That also works because you're making it global here and then calling it as global from here. However, if you did this as an instance, oh, okay, you still get it. What about... Oh, no, this is an instance and the previous one was... what's it called? A class. Okay, so you can do it any of those three ways, according to Kakam. So let's just leave it as this and move on for now. Good caveat though, global variables can be changed from anywhere in your program, and they are generally not a very good idea. So if you have a variable name outside of that class that's the same as this, and you don't remember that you have this variable inside of your class, then you might get into trouble and not realize that you've changed the variable inside of the class by not actually meaning to do that. So it's much better to create variables with limited scope that can only be changed from a few places. For example, instance variables belong to a particular object or instance. Let's get in some practice with instance variables. We've added our person class from before to the editor. So we have a person class with a method of initialize. We learned about that in the last lesson and what it does. @name equals name. Okay. Go ahead and add age and profession parameters to the initialize method. Then set these equal to instance variables in the body of the method. Use the name / @name example as a guide. Okay, so we want name, we want age, we want profession. Okay, so, and then we also want where's my @ I hate the location of my @ I think I've said that so many times in videos. Age, and then we have, and that is not how you spell profession. Profession, there we go. That is equals profession. And so that's going to initialize our object, which basically means when we make an instance, we have to pass these variables or arguments to it, and then those get assigned as @name, @age, and @profession for this specific instance. If we instantiate another object of the class person, then we pass it a different set of arguments, and it's a different object. Okay? So because we haven't actually called this class or done anything with it, we get no output, which is fine for now. Twice the @ twice is class A. We can create class variables by starting a variable name with 2 @symbols. Class variables are attached to the entire classes, not just instances of a class. So that can also be quite bad. No, wait. with two. Okay, so I would let's get this out of the way and then I will explain, like so. So because there's only one copy of a class variable shared by all instances of a class, we can use them to pull off some cool Ruby tricks. For example, we can use a class variable to keep track of the number of instances of that class we've created. So we're going to do that in a second, but before that I would like to explain why you probably shouldn't use two ats. So by using one at, take the example of person. If you instantiate one person, so my person equals new dot person name, let's pass that, and something and something, it really doesn't matter. Okay, say you did this, that should work. Undefined local variable. Oh, it's supposed to be person.new. So in this case, these are going to be attached only to my person 1. I added the 1 there just because I was planning on making an example of my person 2, who, that is not a 2, who has different details. And there we go. So person 2 is going to have different details to person 1. However, if I made a variable here that has double at and is called name, say I make that equal to that, then both of these are going to share this one. Let's call it name smth. Both of these are going to have the same name smth. If I called it through them, but you don't really want that. If you don't really sometimes want the same name, the same variable to be across two different or all of your instances of the class, which is why I myself think that these are more useful, the single at, because they're instance locked. They're just specific to that one instance, whereas these are specific to the whole object. So every instance of that object can use this name smth. Okay, I'm just going to leave it at that and just get on with what they want us to do here. So let's do three things. Create a class variable at people count on line 3 and set it equal to 0. Okay, so just a reminder of what we were doing. We are making a class or a method and a a variable in the class that counts how many instances of this object we have made. So we want to do people count dot count or underscore count equals 0 because at first you have none. Increment at people count on line 8. Okay, so when we instantiate one of these person objects, then we want to increase this number. Plus equals 1, which is going to increase people count by 1. And return people count on line 13 so that our puts on line 20 will print out the number of people created so far. Okay, puts at, oops, that's not the at, people count. So when we call this method from our class, we are going to get how many people have been instantiated. And because we've made 2, we get the output of 2. I have no idea why that is. Okay. We're not meant to put it, we are just meant to return it, which is where I made my mistake and why we saw the 2 there. So if you return it, you can just do an implicit return, meaning you don't have to put the keyword return in there. If you wanted to, you could. That also works. I'm pretty sure that even Kakam is going to accept it. Yep, as you can see. But yeah, we get the expected result of 2. If we were to instantiate another few objects under a different name, of course, even if they had the same argument passed, we should still get 5 as a count. Good. But we want 2 because Kakam is being picky. But okay, moving on. Classes are serious business. So classes like language and person make it easy to understand the concepts of classes and instances. But you probably won't see too many of these classes in real world programs because, let's face it, they're not going to be that useful. However, classes and objects are often used to model real world objects. The code in the editor is a more realistic demonstration of the kind of classes and objects you might find in commercial software. So here we have a snippet of the Rails source code. Let's actually look at that, seeing as they're giving it to us. See how they've created an instance of the record invalid class. Oh, okay. Record invalid. Well, I don't know. Record invalid. Is that gonna come up a search? No, it's out. Okay. So I'm just going to leave that on you. I'm not going to search through it now. But instructions, most of the syntax should look familiar to you. The raise bit, which we'll cover in future lessons, generates a new record invalid error if the user tries to create or save an invalid record. Okay, so also about classes, I'm going to be talking in a games type of view. You might have a class called enemy. There can be different types of enemies. One subclass, well, okay, we're not really moving on to subclasses, but you can have a class of enemies. All enemies attack you. You can have a different class of friends. All friends are friendly to you. You can't attack them, they can't attack you. I don't know, you can have a class of items. They all have to have a name. They all have to have a value of buy, of how much you need to pay to buy them, how much you can sell them for. Just examples of programming, and which can be useful for making an object with, because an object can contain different things which can specify things for the object. I don't really know how to say it, but yeah. Let's just look at this code before we move on. So define, we're making a function, create record attributes, raise error equals false. So we're saying that at first we have no error unless otherwise stated. We also are requiring parameter attributes. Record equals build record attributes. Okay, so build records is, I'm guessing, to be explained. Yield record if block given. Okay, saved equals record.save. Sat new record raise record invalid.new if saved and raise error. So if there's an error, it's going to raise an error, and there's going to be an error if there's an invalid record. Quite easy to understand, even though there's quite a lot of wordiness, if you will. And then it implicitly returns record. Let's save and submit code. And because we never actually call the function, we get no output. However, if we try to create record, only pass in attributes, for example, hello, let's see what happens. Undefined method. Okay. That's slightly confusing, but oh well. In the next lesson, we will be looking into inheritance. So that's what I was talking about, subclasses. It basically means getting one class and getting another class to branch off of the original class. So until then, thank you so much for watching. Please share and like this video if you liked it. Dislike if you didn't like it and tell me how I can improve for next time. But until next time, thank you so much for watching again, and goodbye.